President Lee Jae Myung becomes the first South Korean leader to preside over an open debate at the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday local time, during which participants touch upon artificial intelligence and international peace and security. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective. It's Thursday, September 25th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. President Lee Jae Myung chaired an open debate at the UN Security Council on AI and global peace as well as security. For more on that debate and other UN-related headlines, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, great to be here.
I also have Professor Kim Young-jun at the Korea National Defense University joining our talk virtually. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we begin our session today, let's take a quick listen to the President's pledge with regard to the application of artificial intelligence.
대한민국은 글로벌 책임 강국으로서 AI가 인류의 지속 가능한 미래를 만드는 훌륭한 도구가 될 수 있도록 국제사회와의 협력을 주도하는 길에 앞장설 것입니다.
Right, now that was President Lee Jae Myung on Wednesday, Thomas, local time in New York. Let's start off then with a recap of the UN Security Council's open debate on AI, chaired by President Lee Jae Myung, and of course your takeaways as well.
Sure. So President Lee chaired this open debate, and basically it was, before the UN Security Council, so there's a bit of a focus on the kind of security implications of AI. But in a general sense, he just called for the international community to unite and uphold a kind of a principle of responsible use of AI. He talked about AI as a tool with unlimited potential to either help humanity or harm it. He made the comparison. He was quoting an AI professor who said AI now is kind of like a cute tiger cub, and it could either grow up and become this deadly predator, and Lee said, or it could be helpful like the tiger Derpy from K-pop Hunters, which I thought was kind of a funny line. But basically, he was saying it was vital to establish common global norms, and talking some about, the economic benefits, or it could increase inequality. But when he was speaking kind of the security implications, he just said, he basically said it was comparable. I think not in this speech, but he also gave a kind of a briefing before and compared it to what the UN was doing 80 years ago with the advent of nuclear weapons. He said it was something on, the same level now. And within the sort of security or military space, could be used for good in sort of reducing conflict, delivering humanitarian aid, but could also drive an arms race, spread misinformation, disinformation, cyber attacks. Just from a sort of a takeaway perspective, I think from the perspective of President Lee being the one to chair this meeting, it's just another sign, I think, that South Korea is kind of willing and eager to step forward on the global stage in an increasing manner, which it's been doing over the past few years. In AI in particular, I think Seoul has tried to stake out a leading role in sort of some of the debate and the norms and regulations around AI. South Korea hosted the AI Seoul Summit last year, where they were one of the first countries to come up with a kind of a declaration of sort of guardrails. There was another a responsible use of AI in military conference that was the year before. So, this is obviously an area that I think South Korea feels that it can take a sort of a front row seat in helping define this. And as far as the importance of it in general, obviously it's a tremendously important issue. Whether this is the kind of thing that the world can actually get together on, especially when there's so much financial incentives by so many players, we'll have to see about that.
Right, for sure. We'll have to wait and see. Professor Kim, this is the first time for a South Korean leader to preside over an open debate at the UN Security Council. Speaking within your capacity, of course, as a scholar, how do you suppose the optics of this latest opportunity serve South Korea, diplomatically speaking, of course?
Oh, yes. This is the first time that the ROC president to lead the open debate at the United Nations Security Council. As Thomas explained already, the new ROC president Lee Jae Myung hosted an open debate at the Security Council, especially focusing on AI and its role for the sustainable future, because many people already concerned intelligence gap between rich and poor and other many problems by AI misuse. So this is a great opportunity for the ROC to host this important debate, including AI, and as a global state which has a technology advanced capability, including AI, it's made in naturally South Korea's leading role for the AI and advanced technology. So this is opportunity made increase the South Korean important role on a global stage for AI and global security issues. So this is a great opportunity for South Korea to show its important contribution to the global stage.
Right. Thomas, also speaking about the UN Security Council, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is said to support reform of this council, and India is reportedly emerging as a potential candidate to join the current five permanent members of the UN Security Council. What more can you share?
Right, so this is a topic that actually Guterres has talked about quite a bit over the years, and he's often expressed his support for reforming the Security Council. Before right at this, I think at the start of this session of the General Assembly, he had a press conference and was asked about it, and he had said, outright, he believes it's something that makes full sense. And he made the comparison, that today's Security Council doesn't correspond to the world of today. It corresponds to what it was in 1945 when it was initially formed. So, and he's also said that this was an issue that was kind of taboo in the past, but he has continued to bring it up, and clearly it's gaining traction and momentum. It's frequently kind of discussed in the General Assembly. And yeah, about India, I mean, India has been one of those countries that has been considered, a very viable or likely candidate if something were to happen. I mean, Guterres, has not outright endorsed them. I think there was a report by the, one of the Indian news agencies talking to Guterres' press or UN spokesperson, who did say that, yes, highlighted India's pivotal role in the UN, saying it's an important voice within the UN system, and said that Guterres has a very good relationship with the Indian government. India itself has long advocated for a permanent seat. One of their foreign affairs ministers said India accords it the highest priority and points to, its necessary credentials as a contributor to UN peacekeeping missions, a proponent of multilateralism, et cetera. And so, Guterres basically has said that, it has to be the member states that decide, but, clearly he's in support of the general principle. And it is something that has come up even within this session of the General Assembly among other countries. African nations have also called for having a seat on the Security Council. Even Kenyan President William Ruto mentioned it in his remarks and said that he was calling for that Africa should have 2 permanent seats and some rotating seats, and basically made the point that Africa is the only continent without a Security Council seat, but many UN peacekeeping missions are happening within Africa. So there's obviously they have a stake in this, but their voice is not being represented. I mean, obviously India, you can say similarly about the geopolitics of their region. And I think this idea underlying of the power of the veto among these permanent members that has, even within the Korean context, we've seen it coming up recently where something like Russia and China, can veto any additional sanctions or other actions against North Korea. So we're seeing, the power of these, this veto within the hands of just a very handful of countries in a global and geopolitical framework that is, drastically different than it was. And so, I think that's a debate that is clearly a high level and a high level of importance, and will continue.
Right. Keeping in mind what Thomas has just said, Professor Kim, hypothetically, how would India's permanent membership to the UN Security Council affect geopolitics, especially those affecting matters here on the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and not many people thought about it. India's role for the Korean Peninsula. Many Korean people love India, and India is very famous for, anyway, traditional neutral state role and neutral diplomacy between the West and former communist states like Russia and China, especially during the Cold War, even today. And it is now #1 country for its population. So India is the great country, great power, has a great market, military power, and diplomatic influence. So India is important for the Korean Peninsula security as well, not just global stage. And sometimes it is considered as a potential candidate for permanent member, as already Thomas explained. However, instead, there is always potential opposition to Indian permanent membership naturally, especially among 5 permanent members. For example, China will oppose it definitely. And the U.S. today has a skeptical view of the India's position, especially with Russia and China. And Pakistan is still there. So I don't think it's a very easy or it's a still difficult position. And because of the different national interest among permanent members. So, okay, and that's an important country for Korean Peninsula, but I don't think it's very easy to accept India as a permanent member to 5 permanent members.
Right. That is the opinion, of course, of quite a number of pundits here in the country who say seeking to expand the permanent membership of the UN Security Council will be a daunting task. Thomas, moving ahead, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the UN General Assembly on Wednesday local time. Could you walk us through his speech?
Yes. So, for Zelensky, he, described the situation as a kind of an urgent call to action. He highlighted, I think he tried to frame it not only as Ukraine's issue, but, the global consequences of this ongoing Russian war in Ukraine. And he also, called out, the broader failures of international institutions like the UN for being, he said, too weak to prevent wars. And he also talked about conflicts in Sudan, Somalia, and Palestine as being examples of a kind of a systemic failure of the international order. And so he definitely called for, more countries to get on board behind, in support of Ukraine. But he also highlighted quite a bit the dangers of AI in the arms race as well. And he said this kind of coming arms race could be the most destructive in human history. He also compared its, urgency to nuclear nonproliferation and, urged the creation of global rules to regulate AI and weaponry. And he just talked a lot about, the dangers of AI in terms of, the drone development and how much drones have played such a major and just fast evolving role on the battlefield in Ukraine and Russia. And, he was urging, other nations to join this security coalition and said that, this is a quote, "Stopping Russia now is cheaper than wondering who will be the first to create a simple drone carrying a nuclear warhead." So he's really underlying the urgency, and again, of not just how, speaking from the perspective of Ukrainians, but how much this could spill over and threatens to already spill over into the rest of the world.
Right. Professor Kim, during a press availability session after his talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, U.S. President Donald Trump claimed Ukraine, and I'm quoting, should win back its land and that NATO allies should shoot down Russian incursions. Are we looking at an escalation in tensions between Russia and the West? I mean, this is a dramatic shift in rhetoric from Mr. Trump.
Yes, Trump said, as you said, the NATO allies should shoot down Russian incursion. And I was in Poland, War Study University in Warsaw, and Czech last week, and I just got back from Poland now. And many security and military experts in Poland and Czech feel very security threat from Russia action. And they believe Russia will do this type of ambiguous touching and poking to NATO country to check how NATO will react to Russian action. As you know, there are so many voices, but no action. So due to recent Russian drones near Poland border, tension between Russia and NATO has been very increased, and Trump said NATO allies should shoot down, but not U.S. So this is a very complicated situation, and there is no progress between Russia and Ukraine for negotiation to end the war. So I think there is uncertainty about the ending of the Russian-Ukraine war, and if Trump effort is failed, there will be a very long process to end this kind of a war, and we need to see what will be NATO allies action and how Russian action will be continued.
Right, a very dire outlook. Meanwhile, Thomas, Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara stood at the UN podium on Wednesday as well to mark his country's first UN General Assembly address, I believe in almost 60 years. Could you walk us through his speech and its broader significance, as well as South Korea's ties with Syria, by the way?
Yep. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I think it was the first speech in almost 60 years by a Syrian president, and he basically marked Syria's, the end of Syrian isolation, and its return to the international community after these decades of dictatorship under the, Assad regime, which collapsed only in December of, 2024. And, I think his main message was, urging the lifting of international sanctions. He's describing them as shackles on the Syrian people, a barrier to reconstruction. So that was kind of the message he was trying to send. But at the same time outlined the reforms that are going on within Syria. He's talking about transitional justice commissions, new institutions, plans for elections, and, just emphasizing a state built, based on law, rights, and inclusive governance. So this is obviously a big change from the Syria of the last, many decades. He talked about Israel, criticized Israel's military actions in Syria, and he called them violations of a 1974 disengagement agreement, and a threat to regional stability, expressed support for Palestine. This is kind of part of, he's been making the rounds. Some have called it kind of a charm offensive. He met with President Emmanuel Macron in May, a French president. He had an audience with President Trump in Riyadh. As far as the connection with South Korea, South Korea actually just established diplomatic relations with Syria in April. I think it was one of the last UN member states that South Korea had not had relations with. And, it's a significant, and again, it sort of fits into this framework that we've been discussing, Professor Kim has mentioned, of South Korea's kind of growing role in the geopolitical order. And, from South Korea's perspective, I think, it's one way, it's a way to kind of get in between perhaps North Korea and Syria. North Korea and Syria had long-term, closer relationship, and they're somewhat similar to South Korea establishing relations with Cuba last year. But it also gives South Korea increasing foothold in the Middle East region, and lets South Korea kind of be a participant in the reconstruction of a Syrian new government, a new political system, and South Korea can certainly be a force that is expressing democratic values, and can also offer Syria, a chance. The more sort of partners that Syria can have, I think, in this process is probably seen as beneficial, not necessarily being so reliant on just a few major powers. So that's a place that I think South Korea can also see itself fit into, and I think South Korea has a unique role to play, generally speaking, as far as being a country that has rebuilt from the ashes of a long war, and I think that's kind of an experience that South Korea is eager to share with the world, as well as South Korea's economic development, after such a period of being quite poor after the war and how successfully South Korea has regrown. So I think these are spaces that I think South Korea can play a unique part and sort of sees itself as having a role.
Right, sharing its experience, referred to as the miracle on the Han River, right? Yep. Professor Kim, generally speaking, what is your assessment of the events at this year's UN General Assembly thus far and of South Korea's diplomatic endeavors at the event?
Yeah, from this United Nations General Assembly, we can check how much difficulty, how much conflicts in the global stage today. So each country has a different perspective, and each country has a different national interest. For example, Trump has a very strong and critical speech on the role of the UN for world peace, and there are so many difficult issues like Gaza, as Thomas explained, and Ukraine war, and Russia and North Korea military cooperation, and others. So many difficult issues at the General Assembly, and now it clearly shows how much world situation is difficult. Nonetheless, regarding the new ROC president, Lee Jae Myung, has a very successful first debut on multi-diplomatic platform. It was a great opportunity to engage in a global community and showing the South Korean important role of the global security issue like AI. And the new ROC president has a very successful debut this platform and very impressive keynote speech, like including end speech exchange, denuclearization, and other issue as well. So I think it clearly shows difficult issue of the world situation, but at the same time, very successful debut for the new ROC president, Lee Jae Myung.
Right, and very briefly speaking, Thomas, what are your takeaways from the UN gathering?
I mean, I would basically echo what Professor Kim said. I would also say that, from the South Korean perspective, I think it was a successful debut, and I think it does, is just another step that we've been seeing South Korea wanting to take over the past, X number of years. I don't know exactly how many, but as far as wanting to play a bigger role on the global stage, and I think Lee did a good job of expressing that in terms of the values that South Korea wants to, represent. He talked a lot about democracy in his address, and and addressing some of the challenges such as AI. And then, from a general perspective, obviously, this leaves you with a sense of, there are so many challenges that the world is facing, and, whether we're going to be up for it or this body is the way it's going to be up for it, I mean, are really big questions. I mean, obviously, Trump's stance has kind of thrown things into a bit of a disarray, or I don't know, the U.S. clearly, at least verbally, I mean, sometimes what he says and what he does are not the same thing, but clearly wanting to step back from having a kind of a leadership role or even a participation in some things like, such as climate change or the Paris Accord. So those are going to be big challenges going forward. South Korea obviously wants to play a part in further strengthening and playing its role in the global international bodies. But I think, not an easy time for anyone involved.
Right, which is also probably why quite a number of foreign journalists made note, that is, of the comparison in the speech between President Lee and President Trump on Tuesday at the UN General Assembly. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thomas, as always, thank you so much for your time and thoughts. Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Right, that is all the time we have for this edition. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.